My name is Christina Cantanio. I'm 16. I'm homeschooled, been homeschooled my entire life. And I'd really just like to share with you guys a speech that I've been doing this year. I'm involved in a competitive speech and debate league, and so I've gotten to compete with this. But it's a topic that I'm really very passionate about, and it's the way that our nation and our culture handles charity in general. And being part of a nonprofit, I think that you guys will really relate to it. So I guess I'll just jump right into it. Her name was Katie. She was probably about 8 years old. She had matted and tangled blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a smile that held the unique ability to brighten an entire room. 2 summers ago, I went with a short-term mission trip into the rural areas of the Appalachian mountain range. While we were there, we held a vacation Bible school for the kids, and Katie and I had a connection from the first day. Because the houses were so far apart, we would pick up the kids in their homes every day. The first day that I knocked on Katie's door, I was legitimately afraid that my light knock would cause her entire house to cave in. It was as if her whole house was made of cardboard. She came to VBS every single day, wearing the same worn-out shirt, because she didn't have another one. My heart broke for this precious little girl. I wanted so desperately to give her and her family everything they needed right then and right there. And if I'd had the resources, that's exactly what I would have done. My reaction to the situation of desperate poverty is by no means unique, especially not in America. The United States is by nature a generous nation. And within this generous nation, there are many generous people with the best of intentions. Unfortunately, however, good intentions don't always lead to effective charity. Truly effective charity can be examined in 3 simple questions. What is harmful charity? What are the consequences of harmful charity? And how can we be both compassionate and helpful? Involvement is certainly not the problem in America. According to Robert Lupton's book, Toxic Charity, almost 90% of American adults are involved either personally or financially in the charity industry. He says, quote, "Our entire society, from school children to corporate CEOs, from small churches to massive government agencies, upholds the wonderful value that helping others is a large part of the American character," end quote. So then what's the problem? What creates harmful charity? To us, our charity efforts look and feel really good. There's something incredibly satisfying about handing out clothes to homeless people or digging wells for those who lack clean water. But see, that's just it. It's satisfying to us, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's effective in alleviating poverty. Our entire society is extremely focused on instant gratification. We see this in almost every area of our culture, even in something as simple as the way that we eat. Why are American obesity rates so high? Because in general, we're far more interested in the instant gratification of that milkshake and large fry than we are in the long-term consequences. This unhealthy focus translates all too clearly into our charity efforts. Take, for example, the way that our nation handled the natural disaster of Hurricane Katrina. At first, the response was great, exactly what New Orleans needed. Thousands of much-appreciated relief teams rushed into New Orleans to hand out clothes and food to the victims. But now, 7 years later, churches and charities are still sending relief teams into New Orleans to hand out free clothes and free food to the victims. The reality is that by now, these relief efforts should have shifted into long-term recovery plans. But as it stands, we are still trying to cover up the problem without addressing the underlying cause. This repetitive pattern in charity efforts is comparable to the way that doctors dealt with sickness 200 years ago. They did not have the diagnostic knowledge that we do now, and so the most they could do is treat the symptoms. Because the actual disease was allowed to continue and fester whilst only the symptoms were treated, the condition often worsened severely. Although we may not realize it, we as a society and a culture do the exact same thing to those that we are attempting to aid. We do not seek to address the underlying cause. Instead, we often provide handouts that do more harm than good, and then satisfy ourselves in believing that our temporary bout of generosity and compassion has actually made a difference. Charity ceases being helpful and begins actually being harmful when we seek to treat only the symptoms without addressing the underlying cause. In addition to being ineffective, this cycle of treating the issues that plague our world in only ways that are easy and convenient to us also yields many unintended consequences. What are the consequences of careless relief? Take, for example, the well-known shoe company, Tom's. Tom's has become extremely popular over the past couple of years, largely due to its marketable focus on charity. Tom's is set up as a buy one, give one organization. For every pair of shoes they sell, they donate a new pair to a child in need. Unfortunately, however, Tom's Shoes is a perfect example of careless aid. Why? Shoes are probably one of the least needed things in third world countries. After all, humans were originally created to go barefoot. In the few areas where shoes are not available via local markets, the residents have built up layer upon layer of calluses on their feet. These natural calluses protect them from dirt-borne diseases and also cuts from the ground. Upon receiving Tom's, naturally the recipients would wear them, and as a result, this natural protection begins to fade and eventually is lost completely. Because Tom's generally last about a year, when they do wear out, those who had no shoes before Tom's likely have no source of acquiring new ones, leaving them vulnerable to diseases and injuries. Unfortunately, this has become all too prevalent in the mission field today. When compassionate people attempt to alleviate poverty by treating the symptoms and ignoring the problem, the recipients of their well-intentioned charity become dependent on help from the outside. Although the intentions and the compassion of the organization are noble, the execution is creating a cycle of welfare and dependency which hurts far more than it helps. In addition, because Tom's shoes are available in most third world countries in the local markets, Tom's is interfering with the local market and therefore threatening jobs and hindering growth. Tom's Shoes is but one example of a well-intentioned charity actually hurting those that it's trying to help. In her expose, Dead Aid, Dembezio Moyo said, quote, "The reality is that aid has helped to make the poor poorer and the growth slower. Aid has been and continues to be an unmitigated political, economic, and humanitarian disaster in most parts of the developing world," end quote. Churches, charities, and citizens of the United States are called to some degree to care for the poor. But when we attempt to provide treatment by treating the symptoms and ignoring the problem, there are some pretty major side effects. So then the question arises, how do we as Christians answer God's call to care for the poor without harming them? Compassion is an extremely powerful force, intentionally placed within us by our Creator. But compassion alone can be easily misguiding. We must be wise in the way that we show compassion. Treating the symptoms and ignoring the problem will never yield long-term positive results. Helpful compassion is a result of long-term planning and long-term involvement. In our culture, this is often considered extreme because we want to take the easy way out. Handing out clothes, that's easy. Building a house, relatively easy. Throwing away money, it's easy. But thorough research and long-term planning, it's not so easy. And long-term involvement is downright hard. But you know what? It's not supposed to be easy. Charity is not easy. Serving the Lord Jesus Christ to the best of your ability is not easy. But it is the most rewarding thing that can ever be accomplished in this lifetime. Personal charity takes many different forms. Whether you're donating money, going on a short-term missions trip, or devoting your life to missions work, I encourage you to make the extra effort to make sure that your charity is helpful. Do not let this information discourage you from showing compassion at all. Compassion can be extremely dangerous, but it can also be an extremely powerful tool that, if used correctly, truly does have the power to change the world. But in order to take this information and apply it, we have to be aware of what to look for in a truly effective charity. Look for organizations such as Habitat for Humanity, who seek to use their compassion for the hurting in a way that does not degrade them, but rather sets them up for long-term success. Habitat does not merely give away housing, but rather they offer affordable housing, interest-free to hard workers who simply cannot make enough to afford regular housing. Once the process has begun, Habitat does not merely abandon the recipients of its aid, but rather it partners with them long-term so that they are able to make consistent payments on their house and eventually are set free as responsible homeowners. Habitat for Humanity is but one example of a truly effective charity, and there are many more. I encourage you to seek out these charities instead of settling for the easy way out. Do not let this information discourage you from showing compassion at all. but rather let it be a challenge to you to thoughtfully and prayerfully consider your charity and to make the extra effort to fully engage in long-term compassion towards those in need. Do you remember Katie? I wish I could tell you that my team and I showed compassion in a way that would have a long-term effect. But we didn't. We showed up, handed out clothes, handed out food, held a VBS, and we left. I will probably never see Katie again. But there are hundreds of thousands of Katies all over the United States and all across the world who are in need of true and helpful compassion. Let this be a challenge to you. The next time that you are presented with an opportunity, the next time a Katie is brought into your life, I encourage you to get involved with long-term, helpful